Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod and this is the Monday Night Review. And welcome to episode 130 of the Monday Night Review. I've been researching a case that I thought I was going to do today, but it's going to be way bigger than I anticipated, and so that's what the delay's been. It's going to come when it's going to come, and then my husband works in London overnight, one day a week. And when I'm around, he likes to watch violent stuff that I don't like. So he really likes stuff like Ozarks, Vikings, Game of Thrones, that kind of thing, which I don't like. But I like to watch true crime. So we have a problem because when he goes away, I usually have started something that he's then like, oh no, you can't watch this without me. And so we've been watching this documentary series about the case that I'm going to do that's coming up, thinking that I was going to watch it without him. Nope, he's totally into it. So I was thinking, what am I going to watch? I tried to not watch too much. I tried to use his time away as time for me to work on my podcast or whatever. But my friend Holly, who helps me with every aspect of my life, said, have you seen The Push? And I hadn't. And so I watched it. And I'm very religious about my 10 o'clock bedtime. But I went to bed at 11:15, everyone. Big news, because I had to watch both episodes back to back. And it's not that there's a particular twist to the story or anything, but it's just, in some terms, it's a textbook case of coercive control. It's like someone experienced wrote a script for coercive control, but the victim in all of this is so incredible, and her mother in particular is so incredible, that I then went into a wormhole watching, reading, finding out all I could about today's episode. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I hope that you're all well. I feel like I haven't touched base for ages. We're all fine here. We're just in the midst of the Easter holidays and there's a train strike, which means that it's a Monday. And usually my husband works in London on a Monday, but he's taking the kids swimming. We recorded this last night. He was my guest on the episode. It was fantastic because this case really stuck with me and I wanted to tell him about it. And then we realised that halfway through, my microphone switched off. I got suckered in. I'm doing a new business plan for one of my other businesses, and I got some of those lapel mics. Now, they are all the rage, these little microphones, and I went to try and buy a little microphone. There's a sort of tech shop on King Street in Hammersmith, and I remember going in there with my husband 7 years ago, trying to find one of these little mics because I thought the sound quality would be better. I do makeup. I'm a makeup artist, so I do a lot of makeup YouTube. And I thought, the sound quality is going to be much better if I can have a lapel mic. And you couldn't get them. The only ones you could get were sort of ones for men in suits at conferences, and it just wasn't. They were so expensive and confusing, and now they're everywhere. So I got some. The audio quality is not great, but when you have a guest on the podcast, it's really helpful to have either, obviously, sometimes I do it via Zoom, which is fine. But if you're both in the same room, it's really difficult because you have to share a mic and this mic isn't huge and you have to be quite close to it. So when my husband came on for the people they find on Everest, I kept having to push his head towards the microphone because he kept leaning away from it. And obviously, if there was someone who wasn't my husband, it could get kind of awkward. So they worked really well for that, except obviously at some point I switched mine off. So he's at swimming now thinking that he's going to be a guest on this episode later. And he's not. He knows the story. And that's partly why I set up this podcast. I set it up because my sister and I are always sending each other or telling each other weird stories. Partly because I used to love sitting and singing songs around campfire and talking about spooky stuff when I was younger. So it all brings this together. But also sometimes these stories that I read about or I hear about stick and you keep thinking about them over and over again. And this story today was in the papers, and it is recent, but I didn't notice it at the time, and I know that's down to probably the way it was portrayed in the media, and also to do with how I probably glanced at it and made my own assumptions. I'm going to hold my hands up to it now, but it was just so powerful and inspiring. I find her mother incredibly inspiring. So today we're going to talk about the murder of Fawziyah Javed. So as I said before, my sources today at The Push, a really good documentary on Channel 4 that I recommend. And there are lots of little articles, but they're in places like The Sun and The Mail and The Mirror, places that I don't tend to get my news from. It doesn't seem to have been that well documented. It's in some Scottish papers as well. So I have three out of 5 dogs with me today. 3 pod dogs. 1 stolen the bed. Everyone settle down. We're going to talk about this terrible story. I'm usually quite vague about my trigger warnings because I feel like this is a true crime podcast, and if you're going to listen to it, you've got to expect some violence and some gory bits. But this comes with a massive trigger warning for domestic abuse, domestic violence, controlling behaviour, coercive control. So if you have been in a situation or you find that is going to be triggering and upsetting for you, then please go and find a different, more crimey episode. This is very crimey, but, a nice candlelit murder, or just hang on until next week. But this is a warning because I know that for some people this is going to be a difficult episode to listen to. So Fawziyah Javed is born on the 4th of September 1989. She's born in Leeds to parents Mohammed and Yasmin Javed. Second generation British Pakistanis. She's an only child. She lives with at least one of her maternal uncles. I'm not sure if she lives with both, but she comes from an incredibly supportive, loving family. And both fathers in this episode are called Mohammed. So I will keep saying Mohammed, Fawziyah's father, etc., just to be clear. She's kind and generous. Her mother said, quote, she would do anything for anybody. And she seems really outgoing. She kind of ticks all the boxes, really, in terms of clever, fun, funny, kind. She wanted to be a lawyer from the time she was 8. And she does it. She goes to the University of Sheffield. She graduates with a law degree and she starts work as an employment solicitor. And she is not happy just doing this. She also does a load of charity work, specifically in South Asian communities. But she mentors teens and younger people. She just does a lot for her community. And she is the apple of her parents' eye, but she is also her mother's best friend. They're incredibly close. Her mother is so proud of her and so on her side. I think she's a very good example of loving your child for themselves. She doesn't care about traditions. She doesn't care about society norms or anything like that. She is just proud of her daughter and supportive of her daughter. And as a mother, I find that very inspiring. So in August 2019, Fawziyah is at the optician's with her mum. I cannot remember if she's picking up some glasses for her mother or they're having an eye test, but they meet optical assistant Kashif Anwar and they chat for a bit, and next time he bumps into her, she's without Yasmin, her mother, and he tells her she's the type of woman that he would like to marry. And within a few months they begin dating. Now in July 2020 they get engaged. Fawziyah's uncle is, I've put in my notes, getting a vibe from Kashif. He's not keen. There's something off, he thinks. But Yasmin is, says as long as Fawzia is happy, then that's okay. She knows that her daughter knows her own mind. She knows that her daughter is clever and confident, and so they're fine. Now, Yasmin, when asked in the documentary if she's ever seen Kashif get angry, she says once before they were married, she saw him lose his temper. When they are driving to pick up the wedding rings, Yasmin's there, Fawzia's driving, and Kashif gets into the car and Fawzia says, you need to put your seatbelt on. And he says no. And she says, well, I'm driving. You need to put your seatbelt on because I'm going to be the person that gets in trouble. And he loses it. And I think both women are very surprised. But later he apologizes and says he was really stressed about work and, he took it out on them and he's really sorry. And they think, well, fair enough. We've all been there where you're having a bad day. So, as is traditional in Muslim families, once they're married, Fawzia is going to move in with Kashif's family. And the two families meet. And Yasmin is very clear with them. She tells Kashif's family, Fawzia is a working solicitor. She's not going to be a traditional stay-at-home wife. If that's what you're expecting, that is not what's going to happen. She's going to be going out. She's going to be working. She's going to be focused on her career as well as being a wife. But, she's not going to perhaps conform to the traditional bride that you're expecting. And they say, yeah, fine, that's fine, everything's fine. And I think Yasmin feels better having spoken to them about it. Now, on the 20th of December 2020, Fawzia and Kashif get married. And as is traditional, Fawzia goes and lives with the family. This is, of course, really upsetting for her family. They lose the apple of their eye. It's their only child, but it's what they've expected. And Fawzia is very close with her mum. They text all the time. She's in contact on social media. She comes to see them, but it's quite upsetting for them. But pretty much as soon as they're married, Kashif changes. He becomes controlling and first emotionally abusive and then physically abusive. The first thing that Yasmin and her family notice is both her maternal uncles are blocked by Fawzia on social media, on Facebook, I believe. And Yasmin speaks to her daughter and says, what's going on? And Fawzia doesn't know anything about it. She says, okay, I think it must be Kashif. He doesn't really like me talking to other men. Then she comes off Facebook completely. And when asked about this, she says, well, actually, Kashif says that I shouldn't be on social media. I should be focusing on our marriage. And she agrees. She's not unreasonable about it. Interestingly, when I was talking to my husband about this, my husband and I both have that ongoing argument that we're both on our phones too much. I would like to maintain that I'm a social media manager and content creator, so my work is on my phone. But I would never ask him to not be on social media and vice versa. There's a big difference between saying, do you know what, we both work all day. In the evenings, could we not surf on our phones, or, doom scroll on social media, to saying you have to come off Facebook completely. There are loads of people who I love who don't live in this country anymore. And because of social media, you could say I'm not in contact properly with anymore. But I'm an out of sight, out of mind friend, which is terrible. And having that ability to see them on social media really brings something to my life. And I feel like she's very social, she's very popular, and it's a sad thing to take that away. But also, for anyone who knows about coercive control and that kind of behaviour, this is the start of isolating and putting it in a way that if you look at it on the surface, it doesn't seem unreasonable. Is social media more important than your marriage? Of course not. But actually, she doesn't need to come off Facebook completely. You could just say, can you not be on Facebook when we're together? But he says, for the sake of our marriage, I think you shouldn't be on it. So she agrees. She is, I think, a very kind person. And what I've noticed, I've got a very good friend of mine who is incredibly kind, and she's married to someone who's not very kind. And when I say to her, I'd say this, she go, no, that's not very nice. And I'm just a nice person. And I think, God, I'm not. But I think if you're a very kind person, it just doesn't occur to you to bite back. And I can see how you get to a position where you're like, okay, I'll agree to this. And they'll see that I'm being reasonable. And then they won't ask more of me. The first instance we know of physical abuse that we're aware of is 3 months into their marriage, where Anwar knocks Fawziyah unconscious in a cemetery. Her mother only found out about this later, but this for me is quite an interesting incident. We don't know any more about it. But this is not a casual, she thought I pushed her, but in fact I was just taking her phone off her and she thought it was really rough. Or, I slipped and bumped into her. If you're going to knock someone out, that's a hard punch. And that's pretty horrendous. Also, one night he waits until she's asleep and then he logs onto her phone, goes into her banking and transfers £12,000 from her account to his account. Now, I don't know what their argument about this was, but I can imagine him saying, we're married, your money is my money, this is our money. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Fawziyah is described by her mother as a very intelligent, articulate, strong-minded, very educated young woman. And it's around this time that Fawziyah recognises that she's being abused, and she begins to do what many women in her situation have done before, and she begins to build a case against Kashif Anwar. She tells her mother of the £12,000. Then an incident happens that involves Fawziyah leaving Kashif and going to her mother's house, and she arrives and her mother calls the police. Fawziyah would actually end up speaking to the police twice. We don't know when the second time was, what the second time was about. We know that the second time was around August 2021. But this time her mother calls the police and the police come round to speak to Fawziyah, and she plans to leave Anwar. She is talking to her mother about leaving him, but she wants to get her £12,000 back first. And her parents are like, the door is open, just come home. I think her mother probably said it doesn't matter about the 12,000, just come home. There was no idea of it being, it's your marriage and you have to stick it out, or it can't be that bad. Her parents, her family wanted her home. So on this incident, she's gone home after abuse and the police come around, and in the push, we see the police body cam footage of this incident. And what has happened is Kashif has held a pillow over her face and punched it repeatedly so that she will feel the force, but obviously not have any marks on her face. And she's very, not blasé, but she's almost dumbing it down. And very interestingly, the policewoman says, punching or no punching, holding a pillow over your face is domestic abuse. Punching is the next level of domestic abuse. But had the punching not even occurred, that is still domestic abuse. And she says to the policewoman, I don't want to press charges. I just want to file a report, quote, in case something happens. And this is so distressing to hear. And I wish that there was some way that any police or paramedic or anyone attending a domestic violence situation where this is kind of said or implied in case something happens, pulls the ripcord and just says something is, if you're saying this, it means something is going to happen, because basically this is a woman documenting incidences, building up a case against her abuser because she knows how it's going to end, whether it's sort of she's admitted it to herself or not. We also have recordings of these conversations between Kashif and Fawziyah while she's staying at her mum's, because she records them cleverly. And I think what's incredibly interesting here is as I said at the beginning of the podcast, she is incredible. It is like someone wrote a text for a coercive, controlling husband and told him, Kashif, can you phone up and play the controlling husband and say all of these things? It is just really shocking to listen to. But she remains calm and clear. She doesn't show fear on the phone to him. She does break down at the end and cries, but she doesn't sort of give him the upper hand. He says, quote, the sooner you are dead or the sooner you are out of my life, it'll be better. And you're a bitch. I am your husband. I am telling you to come home now, so you come home now. Don't pretend to be a British woman. You come home because I am the man and I am telling you to. And when she cries at the end, she says, Kashif, this is not how you speak to somebody you love. And she's aware of it. It almost feels like she's two people. There is Fawziyah, the lawyer, the tough, bright, sociable, kind person who knows that this situation isn't right. And then there is Fawziyah, the wife, who married a man who was one way and cannot understand how she got into this position. He also says to her, I'm not going to destroy you. I'm going to finish you. You'll never leave me. As well as this being a sort of fairly typical coercive controlling thing where a woman starts logging the incidents, reporting incidents to the police without pressing charges, either keeping diaries or recording phone calls and all of that. There's also often a triggering event that causes this controlling, violent behaviour to escalate. And one of those things is pregnancy. So Fawziyah returns to Kashif. She wants to get her £12,000 back. And while she's back, she gets pregnant. She's happy to be pregnant. We don't know whether she, loves Kashif despite the abuse, and therefore it is sort of when she gets back, she overlooks the experience, or whether it's hard to refuse to have sex with him without making him suspicious that she's going to leave. We don't know. We do know that she was very happy to be pregnant. But Yasmin says it's clear things are not all right at home still. And Fawziyah says she still plans to leave Kashif and move home and bring up the child in a safe environment. And her family are very much on board with this plan. Again, I think for one would probably assume that they'd say, oh my God, moving back home, leaving your marriage, pregnant, they don't care. They just want her home. They want her safe. They want this baby to be home and safe and looked after. In August of 2021, Fawziyah and Kashif go for an antenatal appointment at the hospital, and there's a woman having an antenatal appointment in the next door bed. And when we hear some of the proceedings from the court in the documentary, this witness is in tears, remembering what she heard. Now, I don't know what it's like in Leeds. I've had lots of antenatal appointments. Some of them have been private, some of them have been public. I've had to go to antenatal wards in the middle of having a miscarriage and sit there with people having successful pregnancies and all of that. It is an emotionally charged place. So this woman is very upset recounting the conversation that she's heard. She hears Kashif say, she says, quote, I could hear him repeatedly call her a bitch, repeatedly saying he should never have married her, wishing he'd never married her. And if one of them died during childbirth, I'm not sure how he thinks he's going to die during childbirth, that would be good because they would be free from one another. He says that she brings out a side of him that he doesn't like, and that's the problem. That's her problem, which again is another massive coercive controlling red flag. It's not his fault, it's her fault. She's making him like this. If she didn't behave like she's behaving, then he wouldn't have to be aggressive, violent, horrible, rude, which we all know is absolute bollocks. But obviously this witness is very upset, and Fawziyah's taking this all, and it's just shows, I think, how he's now taking this out of the home. He obviously thinks that nobody can overhear him. I don't think he's being that brazen about it, but you don't get private rooms on the NHS. So I'm just very, I find this very disturbing. Fawziyah, I think, tells her mother all of this that's been going on, and Yasmin decides she's going to confront this head on, and she invites Kashif's family over to talk to them about the incidents of abuse and about the way that Kashif is treating Fawziyah. And they are more concerned about their reputation. They ask if the police have been involved. They don't want anyone to know. They don't want their name to be sullied. And they don't really care about the abuse. They maintain that Fawziyah and Kashif are very happy. They're a very happy couple. They say, of course, he gets loud sometimes, but that's normal. And they're kind of rude. And Yasmin afterwards says, if they treat me and speak to me like that, I can only imagine what they're like to Fawziyah at home. And sadly, the abuse doesn't stop. We see CCTV footage of Fawziyah walking along a pavement and a car pulls up. Kashif gets out and tries to physically force her into the car. It's not just will you go and get in the car? He pushes her up against the car. She has to shove him away. She's clearly distressed. We then hear from a witness who was there and who says, she was very upset. I tried to calm her down. And then another car drives up, and it's Kashif's father, Mohammed. And the passerby says, you don't have to get in the car. And Fawziyah says, yes, I do. And she gets in her father-in-law's car. And after this incident, Again, she's clever. She records it. Fawziyah calls divorce lawyers for advice on Islamic divorce. And she, in fact, sounds very distressed. But also, we know that as a lawyer, she's not doing this on a whim, she's had enough. And she's very distressed. Yasmin is just wants her daughter home. But we've got Fawziyah, who is kind, really doesn't like to rock the boat, is polite. How many of us women have done something we don't want to because we are being polite? And she says she's going to go through with the walima, which is a marriage banquet thrown by the groom's family. And then they're going on a sort of mini-moon to Edinburgh. And they return on Fawziyah's birthday. So she makes a plan with her mother. She's going through the walima. They're going to go to Edinburgh. And then when they return, Fawziyah was going to say to Kashif, I'm going to go round to my parents' house. They've got birthday presents for me. And then once she's home, she's going to call him and say, I'm never coming back. Yasmin is really concerned. She doesn't want her daughter to go to Edinburgh, and she has a code set up with her daughter. She says to Fawziyah, if you are in danger, text me, I like cream cakes, and Yasmin will call the police to wherever Fawziyah is. And, she's really distressed now. She just wants her daughter home. And Fawziyah says to her, don't worry, in 5 days, I'll be home for good. And so in September 2021, Fawziyah and Kashif set off for Edinburgh. Now, on the 2nd of September, they walk through Edinburgh, they eat at a Wagamama, and then they decide to walk up Arthur's Seat. Now, ahead of the trip, Fawziyah's friend, Lubna Kasim, who had travelled to, I think it's Barcelona, with Fawziyah, had and knew her to be afraid of heights. She had a conversation with Fawziyah, and Fawziyah had said Kashif's really keen on visiting Arthur's Seat, and she then said that Fawziyah looked her directly in the eye and said, quote, I'm not so sure. Obviously, we don't know whether this was foreshadowing or not. Arthur's Seat is an ancient volcano. It's about 251 metres above sea level. It gives you a beautiful view of Edinburgh. It's got a lovely fort. It's it's a very noticeable big hill in Edinburgh that you can walk up. It's a fairly big walk, I'd say. It's not an easy skip up there after your Wagamama's walk. But Kashif is very determined that up they're going to go. And they're not wearing walking boots or anything. Fawziyah at this point is 17 weeks pregnant. And I would say it's not a simple walk for a pregnant woman. One thing I really noticed that I don't think anyone really prepared me for was your centre of gravity being off, even when you're not very pregnant. I fell over a lot when I was pregnant. You're just not as sturdy on your feet as you were before. Now, I really didn't like Kashif Anwar's defence lawyer. And one of the reasons he said there was nothing wrong with the marriage was you can see CCTV of them walking through Edinburgh, through Waverley Station and through Holyrood Park, which is next to Arthur's Seat, and she's linked arms with him. But I don't know, what do you want her to be doing? Pushing him? Refusing to walk with him? He is aggressive, he is touchy, he is controlling. She is going to be doing what needs to be done. So they walk up Arthur's Seat. It's not a hill with sort of concrete footpaths. There are certain lengths of footpath, but then it all gets kind of steep and slippery as you get to the top. They are supposed to be up there to watch the sunset. They get there after the sun has set, but they take a few selfies. It's a very beautiful view of Edinburgh. And at some point just after 8 o'clock, Fawziyah slips off the edge. Interestingly, police officer Robert Williamson said that in his entire time as a police officer in Edinburgh, no one had ever fallen off Arthur's seat. The most happens is, someone might slip awkwardly and break a bone. I broke a bone on my kitchen floor. It happens. But no one has ever fallen off. It is not somewhere you fall off. You need some momentum. Now, a woman hill walker sees Kashif running towards her, saying that his wife has fallen and they need to find her. He has found a man slightly further up the path who has called 999. Kashif has found this man. He says, I haven't got my phone on me. My wife's got my phone and she's fallen over the edge and you need to call 999. And the recorded phone call, the guy sounds really bemused. He says his wife's fallen off. He sounds really bemused, and he then carries on and he finds this hill walker and he says, my wife's fallen off, I need to find her. Now, this is not a lovely green grassy hill. Where she has landed is thick gorse and overgrowth. And we know that Kashif's phone has been stolen at York Station. And so he says, my phone's been stolen, my wife has the phone, blah, blah, blah. And he says to this hill walker, you need to help me look for my wife. So he goes back to the man who's calling 999. They're asking questions about Fawziyah, like, is she bleeding? And all of that. And he's shouting down the hill to where he thinks she might be. And the hill walker finds her. Despite falling 15 metres, that's 50 feet, Fawziyah survived long enough to tell this witness, quote, don't let my husband near me, he pushed me. The walker says, he pushed you? And Fawziyah says, I think so, I can't remember. She has a massive head wound. When the police arrive, it's difficult for them to get to her, but again, she says to the police officer, don't let my husband anywhere near me, he pushed me, he pushed me. And she says to them, she tried to end the relationship and he pushed her. And the policewoman says, have you got your phone on you? And Fawziyah says, no, my husband took it before he pushed me. She then sadly repeatedly asks if she's going to die and if her baby is going to die. She then falls unconscious and is declared dead at the scene at 10:18 that night. By which time she's still there because it is such a difficult site to access. They haven't yet been able to safely get her into an ambulance and into a hospital. She dies of heart failure due to massive injuries caused by the fall. And of course, sadly, her baby doesn't survive either. The hill walker would later say that she had been sort of looking around for a while before Kashif casually mentioned that his wife was pregnant, and she was really shocked because she was like, oh my God, he just was like, oh yeah, she's pregnant. Didn't mention it, didn't seem that concerned. And because of what Fawziyah said, and the fact that it's, if you fell, you might, it's just a very odd place to fall off the side of. Kashif Anwar is arrested on suspicion of murder. When he is searched at the police station, they find Fawziyah's phone in his pocket. When asked why he didn't use it to call 999 immediately, he says he forgot it was there. At 5 a.m. the next morning, there's a knock on Yasmin's door and police tell her that her daughter has died. Meanwhile, police are examining evidence against Kashif Anwar. He's already told a few different versions of what happened. One version that he initially told the member of the public who called 999 for him was that they were Coming back down, they both slipped. He tried to grab her arm but couldn't. She'd already slipped over the side. Then he tells the police that they were taking a selfie at the top. He slipped, knocked into her, and she went over the side, which sounds to me like they said, well, your wife says you pushed her. And he then thought, oh, okay. But I would say there's, for me, enough of a difference between we were walking back down and we both slipped, and we were taking a selfie at the top and I slipped. There's a huge difference for me there. So they also check Fawziyah's phone records, and they can see that immediately after she falls, he calls her father. This call lasts 6 seconds and isn't picked up. He then calls a number that is not saved on the phone, but they would identify as belonging to Kashif's father. So it's thought that he took the phone out of his pocket, forgot it wasn't his phone, called dad that's saved or whatever she, remembered, oh God, this isn't my phone, hung up and then dialed his father's number. He speaks to his father for 1.5 minutes, I believe. When asked about this, his father would say that Kashif called him to tell him about the accident. But then Kashif has no explanation for why he didn't call 999 first, or why he didn't immediately hang up from speaking to his father and call 999. He says he then forgot he had the phone. I have friends who are first responders, who are medics, who fire people, and I know, probably we all know, that when someone is in this situation, when someone you love is hurt, 999 or 911 or whatever the emergency number is where you are, is the lifeline. That is the person who is going to make everything okay. That is the person with the knowledge and the skills to help you in this helpless situation. You don't phone your dad first. You don't forget the phone is there. So for me, that is just immediate guilt. What is really interesting is under Scottish rules, criminal trials can be recorded for the purpose of documentary making. There are strict guidelines for broadcasters to follow, including we don't know the name of the jury, don't see the jury, witnesses can be made anonymous. But it's through this that we can see all of this evidence. We can hear the phone calls, we can see the body cam footage, we can hear from the witnesses. And we can also see her relatives silently crying while listening to these phone calls between them that she'd recorded. And obviously, I don't think they'd realised the extent to the abuse until you hear it. And so that must have been incredibly hard. And it also makes it clear that despite Yasmin saying she is going to carry on her career and she is not a traditional wife, he has a traditional view. He is the man, he is the husband, she must obey, she will do as he says. And she sticks up for herself throughout. And it just made me think, gosh, this is a very educated, very confident, very supported woman. She has got a loving family behind her. How many women are out there without that who are dealing with this kind of control? It's just really shocking to hear. Now, Yasmin is a total, utter badass in court. She is tough. She doesn't cry on the stand. She is calm. She is clear. The defense lawyer is tough. He tries to make it look like she lied or she didn't say some stuff she should have said, and she doesn't bat an eyelash. She answers him straight. He says, well, you didn't say this in your first interview with the police. And she said, my only child has just died. I don't remember anything about that interview. And the way she says it, you're just like, too fucking right she doesn't, and she doesn't have to. And it's just incredible. And the feeling you get from watching her is this is her maternal responsibility. Her daughter may be dead, but her maternal responsibility has not diminished, and that she is doing her daughter no good to be emotional on the stand and to have these men push her about. Fawziyah has got all of this evidence. She told the witnesses and the police that she was pushed, and her mother is not going to let her down. And it's just, she is amazing to watch. We also hear from the arresting officer, who said that when Kashif Anwar was taken into custody, he's not crying, he's not distressed about his wife and unborn child at all. The first thing he asks about is bail, how much bail will be, is he entitled to bail, and then what the sentence is for murder. And he says, quote, "My life is ruined now." And the officer was like, he was plainly talking about his arrest for murder, not about the death of his wife. It's also very interesting to see the stark difference between Fawziyah's family and Kashif's family. Kashif Anwar is sentenced to life in prison and given 20 years until parole can be considered. And this is not a unanimous verdict from the jury. It's a majority verdict. And he that morning, the morning that he's brought into court for the sentencing, he kind of smirks. He doesn't look that bothered. And when he is taken down, the uncles shout and they are removed. And the judge has said anyone shouting or doing anything is going to be removed. And they have all sat silently crying and throughout, but they shout and they're removed. And Yasmin doesn't bat an eyelash, doesn't try to calm them down. She just sits there like a rock. The judge then addresses the jury to dismiss them, and he actually gets choked up talking to them about such a horrible case. There's only one time that we hear from Mohammed, Kashif's father. He says, "I don't know why they're so upset. She's not their daughter, she's our daughter now. She married Kashif, she's our daughter," which I think is a bizarre thing to say. Whether it's your culture or not, to be surprised that your in-laws are upset at the death of their child, and he says, we're upset, they shouldn't be upset. They show no part of being upset. They wave and blow kisses at Kashif while he's in court. They don't look upset. They don't speak to Fawziyah's family. And the only time he gets very upset is he says, when they got engaged, quote, "She said she had to have a diamond ring. And that diamond ring cost him £6,300 and the police still haven't given it back." And he says, "I'm getting angry now. You're going to have to stop filming." I'm sorry. She has double that in her bank account. I'm fairly sure she didn't insist on having a diamond ring. I'm fairly sure that your son should have a ring to propose with. And just, that's what he's upset about. It's absolutely... By the time of filming, so I believe that this came out in January of this year, and by the time of filming, Kashif Anwar's family still hadn't returned Fawziyah's belongings to her family. They hadn't spoken to them to say how sad or sorry they were about what had happened. You don't have to say whether you think your son is guilty or not guilty. You can be sorry that young life and the life of your grandchild has been taken, whether you think it's an accident or not. I think Yasmin really hit the nail on the head when she said Kashi's father knew that Fawziyah had fallen from just after 8 o'clock at night, and doesn't tell Yasmin that something has happened to her child until the police turn up. And I think she's just like, that shows you what kind of person he is. And for me, the CCTV footage of Kashif trying to get Fawziyah into the car and then his dad turning up literally minutes later to force her into the car. The fact that I know if I murdered my husband and I called my dad's not around anymore, it's probably the same for my mum. But if I called my dad and said, I pushed Joe off a hill, I know two things. He would tell me to hang up, call the police and tell them what I'd done, and he would get to me as soon as possible, as would my mother. And they would be like, we're going to be supportive of you, but you've done something wrong. You need to suck it up. I believe that Kashi's father knew what his son had done, probably told him that was fine to do, get rid of her. She was not towing the line and was more complicit in this abuse than, for want of a better expression, he's been given credit for. He is in prison for 20 years before he'll be considered for parole. I hope he's having a horrible time there. I think what I really took away from this case was an incredible woman with an incredible family and an inspirational mother. We then, at the end of the push, we see her talking at a conference that I believe is for victims of domestic abuse. And she says, I'm doing this because I cannot have another person go through what I'm going through. And obviously, hindsight's a beautiful thing. I'm sure she's like, why did I even, when she said she was going back for the 12 grand, why did I bother? All of those things. But how can you think that something that serious is going to happen to your child? And so, yes, the two women in this family, Yasmin and Fawziyah, are just inspirations. And as Fawziyah's friend Ingrid said, quote, she died like a lawyer and she left the case that she needed. The defense lawyer said in his closing statement, he's a terrible man, he's a horrible man, he's an abusive husband. You don't have to, we're not asking you whether this is the case. We're asking you whether he pushed his wife or whether she slipped. And I feel like she made sure that she said, he pushed me. She made sure she recorded all of the phone calls. She logged with the police his abuse. Just what I want to say at the end of this episode, sorry, it's quite a dark, heavy episode, but if you're experiencing domestic violence in the UK, you can call 0808 2000 247 24 hours a day. It's the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, and it will give you free confidential advice. If you can't phone, go to the doctor. You can say that you need a smear test, say that you've got something strange going on with your female parts, whatever female parts you choose, and speak to your GP, speak to a friend, speak to a stranger in a coffee shop. Women will stick together for the most part. And if you say to the woman serving you your coffee, I need help, I'm pretty sure they'll dig in and they'll find something. But if you're in a situation where you are having to keep a log, you're having to record phone calls, you're reporting incidents to the police without pressing charges, then you are experiencing domestic abuse of some kind, and it is okay to speak out. And that is the terrible murder of Fawziyah Javed. I hope that this episode was okay. I know that for a lot of people it could be quite triggering. I just was, if you want to watch the documentary, then do. It's absolutely fantastic. I love to hear from you, so you can send me an email, themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok at The Monday Night Review. You can join Patreon. There are 2 tiers. You can get ad-free, every episode ad-free for just £1 a month. And for something like £5 a month, you get bonus episodes. There's loads of written stories up there for you to have a read while you're having a cup of coffee. So go over and check it out. And as always, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.